Hey everybody, we're just getting used to using HackMD for our meeting notes. So the second link that's in there, Chris, if you want to try clicking in and log in with your GitHub credentials and just add your name to the attendee list. It's my new favorite tool, and while we're doing that, Bob, if you want to share whatever your first screen is. Then we'll get started, and I know.
Diane, is this the second link in the invite?
It's the second link in the chat. You look in chat, I'll just paste it again. Put it again. Yeah, I used it last week's. There we go, perfect. If you can make that full screen. No. Do this. So, hello, everybody, and welcome again to another EDU SIG meeting. And I've got two talks queued up today, one from Bob Killen from UMich and one from Steve Braswell, our chair from UNC, who's going to be a little bit late because he just pinged me and said his current meeting is running over, so it's good that we have Bob up first. If any of you saw the email that I sent to the mailing list, there was a great talk by Killen, I think is how you say his name, from Laval University in Montreal, that I encourage you all to take a look at, and we'll have him come on and join us hopefully in the EDU SIG as well soon. But they're doing some great work there with OpenShift and the data scientists at Laval University doing research, and it was a wonderful talk. And it's just another one of the very interesting use cases at the EDU arena for OpenShift, and it was a great talk that he gave. So I do encourage you to take a look at that. And if any of you want to do next month's topic, let me know, and I'll add you to the agenda. And if there's other things that you want to talk about, OpenShift related, do let me know. And please do add your name to the HackMD meeting notes. We'll just give everybody a few minutes to join. Start a minute here. Usually 5 minutes after the hour is a decent amount of waiting time. And then we'll let Bob give his talk about what's going on at University of Michigan. So Bob, why don't you get started? And we'll have Q&A after Bob's talk, and then hopefully by then Steve Braswell will have joined us. So take it away, Bob, and thanks for doing this.
Sure thing. This is just a sort of another presentation I did for the CNCF group not too long ago, talking about sort of the academic environment and some of the user stories space and how various different CNCF technologies can be applied. First, to get some of the stuff out of the way, my name is Bob Killen. I'm a senior research cloud administrator here at the University of Michigan. The group that I work for is Advanced Research Computing and Technology Services. Our group essentially handles the computational research needs for the entire university, whatever they may be: classic batch system, data pipelining, anything and everything. I am also a CNCF ambassador as of this year. If you want to reach out to me in any way, shape, or form, Mr. Robbie Tables is pretty much my handle across every social media, GitHub, whatever.
And I'm Chris Cutler. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the teaching and learning applications for OpenShift and Kubernetes here at the university. I don't have as catchy of a title as Mr. Bobby Tables. You'll just have to remember me as C. Cutler. I do business planning for our central IT, and so for the last couple of years, that's involved standing up a service to host applications that want to be containerized. And kind of our latest thing is that we're starting to move our web hosting environment into containers. And so when Stephen comes by and he starts talking about WordPress, I'm going to be very interested in hearing what he has to say. But if you want to get in touch with me, my email address is listed on the slide as well.
dive right in. So really there are three pillars of academia, at least when it comes to sort of IT and the areas of IT. This is your support or central IT, teaching and learning, which Chris will be able to talk a lot more about than I can, and then research.
Bob,
Huh?
can I interrupt? Bob, can I interrupt? Just you're fading in and out. So maybe if you brought your microphone up to your mouth, that would be better.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. I'll start over at the beginning of this little part then. So there are really sort of like three pillars of academia, at least when it comes to the IT side and what can be applied to CNCF and all that other. You have institutional support, which is your central IT, teaching and learning, which Chris will be able to talk significantly more about than I can, and then research. Although research could technically be considered optional depending on the educational institution, but in general, they're dealing with it in some way, shape, or form. First, let's tackle institutional support. This is sort of your classic enterprise business of education. They tend to be heavily invested in on-prem resources. Generally, virtualization is going to be like VMware or something like that. They tend to host many sort of off-the-shelf applications, and they're charged with managing those off-the-shelf applications. A lot of those are also sort of essential services for, login services, Active Directory, printing, that are critical to the entire institution. So like HA and business continuity is a critical function of all that. The other thing I've just, generally noticed there isn't like a good metric or anything for it, but something I've seen is a lot of these groups tend to be like early on to sort of like their DevOps transformation. They all understand the business value of it. They haven't quite gotten there yet. It might not necessarily because they're understaffed, but they tend to require like a forcing function, like a new CIO with a directive or data center renovation requirements or something like that really drives them towards adopting that stuff. That there are a couple important lines of business space. There's certainly more, don't get me wrong, but these are really just the applicable ones. We have like identity and access management and SSO, single sign-on, IT infrastructure and hosting, application support, and logging and monitoring. Things like PeopleSoft and all that I'm not going to dive into. So when it comes to like IAM and SSO, this tends to be a lot more complicated than people think and tends to account for like a quarter to a third of like IT infrastructure and resources. This will make a little bit more sense when I rattle off some stats here about the University of Michigan. We have 19 schools and colleges, 45,000 students, grads and undergrads, 8,000 faculty, 32,000 staff, not including 36,000 hospital staff. That also doesn't include like the alumni and retirees that get to retain their identity, access to some campus resources. Additionally, there's other things like group federations, so visiting faculty, sponsored affiliates, and all those other fun things. So managing identity and all that is a very, very large and complicated portion of all this. And a lot of this is actually handled under the set of like tier services. This was a sort of Internet 2 initiative, like trust and identity and education and research. And that sort of manages like three big tools that you'll find in just about every institution in one way, shape, or form. That's Shibboleth, which is sort of the EDU SSO system, Grouper, and Co-Manage. Shib is honestly kind of antiquated at this point. There's no admin UI. I believe one is actually just started under development not too long ago. There's no like REST API or anything like that. There's no native OADC support, and changing it generally requires modification of XML files. Not the best. Then Grouper and Co-Manage sort of work hand in hand to sort of handle multi-org provisioning. So if you have to provision a group in two different universities, those tools to sort of handle that sort of thing. So then we have like infrastructure and apps. This tends to be VM hosting. A lot of times it's going to be like hosted in VMware. There might be one or two managed OS offerings, like RHEL and some Windows flavor. There's very little to no adoption of virtual networking and virtual networking policies. As far as like hosted DB offerings go, these tend to be limited to like Oracle and MS SQL, with some support for MySQL and even a lesser amount like Postgres. The big thing we're seeing these days is a lot more sort of hosted like web services. So Drupal, WordPress is we're going to be talking about here after this. And then some other like smaller in-house developed sites along with the other services that aren't necessarily relevant here, like the file and print things. As far as logging and monitoring goes, every institution I know of is using Splunk in one way, shape, or form. However, what they're collecting and monitoring tends to be fairly limited just because of the Splunk model of charging like, I forget how much it is per megabyte ingested, but it's forced institutions to sort of limit their actual like log collection amount or spin up multiple systems with some of the logs going to Splunk, like your audit logs, and some of the logs going to Elk Stack or Greylog. The other thing is a lot of the like metrics and alerting stuff I've seen tends to be pretty basic and focused strictly on like OS or basic application monitoring. And these tend to be in the form of like Nagios or Nagios derivatives like CheckMK and Asinga. So what would adoption of sort of the cloud native stuff and cloud native tools enable? The big thing is like adoption of containers, Kubernetes, and all that really delivers on the idea of like build once, run anywhere, and offers a like normalized support platform by being a unified API for on-prem and cloud deployments. One of the things that I've seen through multiple institutions is like when going to the cloud, institutions tend to fear making a decision because they think they might have to like reteach and retool. So if like we select AWS in a couple of years, we might have to go to Azure or something like that. It means we have to throw everything out and relearn how to do everything in Azure. And by building towards OpenShift, building on top of Kubernetes, it's the same API everywhere. So as you start teaching people how to use this stuff, it makes things significantly easier to pick up and move to someone else and offer like a unified support platform. Then sort of piggybacking on that, we also have like improved logging and metrics collection. Many applications these days will natively support the Prometheus logging system. And funny enough, that was literally spun out as of this morning and is now a part of the Open Metrics project, which is now a new like CNCF project. Then like you heard me talking about like Splunk not too long ago with the FluentD, another CNCF managed logging project. You can actually use that single agent to log on everything and then send off to multiple systems. And we've actually ditched the Splunk agent completely here because like for us, the Splunk agent was actually like producing more logs than the things we really cared about. Not to mention like it forced you to actually go from journal D to text files for it to pick up and send them off when FluentD can just find and listen to journal D by itself, send the stuff we care about to Splunk, and send everything else to our other instance of Elasticsearch. Lastly, like everyone here is in the OpenShift EDU SIG, so I don't think I have to like cover like the whole thing of faster mean time to patch, resolving security issues, and the blue-green deployments that come with this stuff. But one like little note I will say, at least on all this combined, is like since many institutions sort of skipped the first go around with adoption of like sort of cloud native methods and practices, so building immutable systems, building Packer pipelines, and pushing stuff out there, it's a great time for them to actually like start fresh and start adopting this stuff from the get-go. Is there actually like any questions before I turn it over to Chris to cover some of the teaching and learning stuff? Okay, cool.
Not yet. Go for it, Chris.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're seeing OpenShift Kubernetes adoption here at the university. And in order to do that, I'm going to provide a little bit of historical context on how the teaching and learning space was covered kind of technically. Teaching and learning space for many years was dominated by the running of the learning management system on campus. And while that's still a core component of the ecosystem of learning, of teaching and learning, it's not really provided on campus anymore. So when I joined the university, 2007, our group was primarily responsible for providing a Sakai derivative for a learning management system. You also had Blackboard and Moodle in that space. There was some SaaS offering, but for the most part, people were offering those things on premise, monolithic Java applications running in a huge stack. And for a while, the learning management system was the cutting edge of technology as teaching and learning was provided to campus. However, I think what we started to see 2009, 2010, there started to be some additional tools that came out like Piazza, which was an online discussion forum that was pure SaaS that was plugged into the learning management system via LTI, which I know Bob's a big fan of. But there were also some custom quizzing tools that started to kind of develop on the edge. That indicated that the market for the LMS wasn't progressing fast enough, and that there were individual companies that were coming into the space that had a lot of specific knowledge around a particular area of pedagogy, and they wanted to be able to plug into the learning management system. I think over the course of 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, the market space really started to evolve more towards SaaS. So Desire to Learn, Canvas have come into the space, and what the individual universities are doing is much less focused on the learning management system. We just consume SaaS-based learning management systems now, and we're focusing on some of the other things. So as pedagogy is evolving, I know the university has put a lot of resources into looking at things like gameful learning and flipped classroom, which are alternative ways to your traditional learning management system, which was focused on pushing out files, producing online discussion forums, providing test engines, giving feedback to your students in the form of grades, so on and so forth. So in the case of Gradecraft, which is a gameful learning management system that runs on Kubernetes, gameful learning is a new way of looking at the way that a student is going to move through the classroom. So instead of having a set number of assignments that they go through prior to taking a quiz, you have one chance to take a quiz, you have one chance to take a test. In Gradecraft, you have multiple paths to get through course material. So you have alternative assignments kind of based on what your aptitude and based on what your interest level is within a subject. When you get to a quiz, you have a couple of times to take the material. The idea is based on eventual mastery as opposed to a one-time snapshot of where you are in regards to the material. And so, Gradecraft is one of the LMSs that's in the space of gameful learning. Gradecraft and the multiple paths through the course material really breaks the brain of your traditional LMS, like a Canvas, like a Sakai, like a Blackboard. And so they don't integrate well together, although sometimes you can integrate content for a particular course as a plugin into something like Canvas via LTI, and then your students would just go to Gradecraft for all of their course material, as opposed to it being a tool within the learning management system. So on the next slide, I talked a little bit about gameful learning, and the other example I mentioned was flipped classroom. So when I came to school, it was here at the University of Michigan, and I was expected to show up for lectures, and the instructor got up in front of the classroom and talked for 45 minutes about economics or whatever, and I was given assignments to take home and use. And now what we're evolving towards is the flipped classroom, where the instructors provide online video for students to view in advance of the class, where you show up at the class, and the class is more of a formative experience as opposed to the instructor providing outbound material. And the best example of a flipped classroom is what we see now with the MOOCs. So Coursera, FutureLearn, edX are all in the MOOC space, where these are the massive open online courses where universities have the ability to expand their scope beyond just the students that they have on campus to anyone who can log into the MOOC worldwide. And so over the last few years, we've seen the evolution of the business model of the MOOC from completely free content to now you have some certification programs, and now universities are getting into the space where you're credentialing and offering degree programs online through the MOOC, and that's something that we here at the university are starting to look at. There are some risk factors there because you don't want to take away from the educational experience and the value that you're providing to your brick and mortar customers in this case, which in the case of the university are the students who are on campus. If you can get the same educational experience for a fraction of the cost through the MOOC, why would you pay for the online, why would you pay for the on-campus experience? And so, they're still working out kind of the business model for how that makes sense and what the price point is for a completely credentialed program. But in the meantime, universities are kind of focusing on, well, how do we add value to this MOOC experience? And what do we want to get out of the MOOC experience in addition to the experience that we're providing to students? And so kind of the edge there is the data that streams out of the MOOCs in the form of data analytics that are consumed in a couple of different ways. There's also some research that's going on into how to make other classes other than the STEM classes available and viable at a MOOC level. So for your language-based courses, how do you do peer review and grading? There's an icon on that slide there called MWrite, and that's one of the big projects that's going on here at the university for how do you do large-scale peer review for language-based courses, either for introductory online courses on campus or at the MOOC level. And that's a project that's running, that we have running here in OpenShift, but there's also a large data analytics component that goes into that. How do you come up with intelligent algorithms for seeing what's within a language-based assignment and responding to that? There's also coaching tools that are in use in some of these MOOCs as well. So in addition to kind of administrative tools that go on at the MOOCs, there's also the course content themselves. And this is something that you see if you ever take a Python or a data analytics course in Coursera, you're probably going to be piped into a Jupyter notebook. And the Jupyter notebooks they run well in the Kubernetes infrastructure. I know here within our School of Information, they're running a lot of Jupyter notebooks, Jupyter Hub on Kubernetes. And a lot of the Python assignments are then passed through a parsing text tool that's part of a continuous integration pipeline. So last slide for me, Bob. So data analytics, this is really where our teaching and learning group here on campus is focused, in addition to a lot of researchers, and I think it's not unique to what's going on at the university. As you have your campus students taking classes in a lot of different formats, online, through LMS like Canvas, through a MOOC like Coursera, how do you standardize the event stream of your students accessing course content in a common way so that you can consume that and start to make predictive analysis of whether your student's going to be successful in a course or not? And so the university, we put a lot of effort into helping to develop the Caliper framework, which standardizes events that come from multiple online educational tools like Coursera, like the MOOCs, like Piazza, like a lot of the custom testing frameworks that are out there, so that you're speaking a common language. If you pull information back into a data warehouse and you want to report on what students are doing in order to make predictive analysis, in order to learn when you need to intervene when a student's not doing well, you need to speak a common syntax, and so that's what the Caliper standard is for. So when you have a common framework for defining the educational events, then that feeds back into a data warehouse. The university is part of a consortium called Unison that's standing up something called the Unison Data Platform, which feeds in university-specific information that we have access to, but it also has de-identified information from other units and schools that our researchers can use for the basis of understanding, those factors that I was talking about earlier. When do you intervene in a student? How do you predict whether a student's going to do well in a particular class? This is kind of the edge of what we're trying to do with data analytics right now. And once you have all that information in a common data warehouse, then the edge is building the tools that use algorithms to analyze the data and make those predictions. And so we have tools that are running in OpenShift and primarily in OpenShift on campus that are where the OpenShift continuous integration pipeline is a real nice value add for development teams as they make fast changes to the code in relation to working with the researchers that are driving the algorithms themselves. So that's a little bit about the teaching and learning space. Does anyone have any questions about what I was just talking about? Okay, I'll turn it back to you then, Bob.
Cool. I'll skip over that because you pretty much covered that. I'll dive into sort of my bread and butter area. Actually, first of all, is my mic sounding better now? I'm gonna go with yes, hopefully. Anyway, so research. This is where I work every day, and it is sort of the wild west of university IT for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, researchers can actually like own their resources unless it happens to be like a state grant. The grants go to the researcher so they can own their hardware. They can go to whatever cloud provider they want. It can be very difficult to wrangle. The other thing is like some grants these days will come with credits for specific cloud providers. And it also means when they leave, they get to take it all with them. So it's up to like us as research IT support staff to sort of entice the researchers to use our centrally managed services that might be a bit easier for them to consume. And if we can't deliver that, they're just gonna do something on their own. The other thing is a lot of their tools can be like honestly written in just about anything. We still run a lot of Fortran code, mostly for like chemistry. There's also like a bunch of stuff that's still based off like CentOS 6 and even older systems that just because when they compiled the application, they used a specific version of glibc or for a whole wide variety of reasons. It's very sort of particular about what it's running and where it is. And honestly, the burden of making it work tends to fall to the undergrads and the students. The researcher just wants it to run, and the students are the ones charged with making it work. But in sort of at least the computational research side, there's sort of three big fields where all this stuff can sort of fit in. We have our data science. This is your classic like Hadoop, Spark, Flink data streaming. It's tend to be what people think of when they hear like machine learning and big data. You have HTC or high throughput computing. This is almost like embarrassingly parallel computing. Good examples like SETI at home. And then you have HPC, which is sort of not cloud friendly and very sort of batch scheduler and requires specific hardware. Cool thing about all this stuff is like all of it can actually run on top of use of cloud native methods and tooling. It's just certain things are better than others. In the data science side, it tends to work extremely well both on-prem and in the cloud. And adoption of like sort of cloud methods can be better because like there's some issues like Spark and all that don't handle multi-tenancy well. So we've seen a growing adoption of just like spinning up multiple instances of it. And this is very easy when you're in like Google AWS or wherever, you can just spin something else up. But now with things like the Kubernetes like Spark operator and some of the other things, it's easy to just like spin up as many instances as you want, just give them a namespace and let them do their thing. For the HTC side, if you happen to see or attended the KubeCon EU keynote, CERN did a great demo of how they're using Kubernetes and Federation to use Condor, sort of their big scheduler. And a lot of this stuff is like in the HTC world is like very job focused. And the cool thing about it works like pretty much anywhere there's available CPU. There's no application checkpointing or anything like that. It really works equally well on cloud, or in the cloud or on-prem, on top of Kubernetes, on bare metal. It really doesn't matter. It's just give us as many cores as we can. HPC is a little bit more of a challenge. It tends to be job focused like HTC, but it's a classic multi-user environment where everyone has their own UID and GID and they're logging in and doing stuff. There's also more specialty hardware like InfiniBand, low latency like high performance shared file system like Lustre GPFS, RDMA. The other thing is like systems tend to never go down. By that I mean like they tend to go down once or twice a year for maintenance. And the jobs themselves can actually like take from minutes to weeks to complete. Us here personally, we have a 28-day wall time, so a job is allowed to run up to 28 days before it can be, optionally killed. These sort of three domains are like, at least when it comes to computational research, are like what your researcher would normally think of in space. What they don't think of is all the other tooling that's involved in just running those things and running them well. So on the like HPC side, they're going to be running Postgres. They're going to be running like MongoDB, usually Nginx. They're also going to be like likely running GitLab or something like that to keep track of all their stuff. They might be running Squid, which is commonly used both in the HTC and HPC side, just to help cache a lot of those resources that they'll be using. They'll be using Grafana to visualize their stuff. Elasticsearch for logging, and the data science side. All of them actually use like Jupyter Hub pretty heavily. And data science side is as I sort of like talked about before, is already like adopted this stuff really, really well. The other thing that like is not honestly on this chart that all of them tend to be using is like a wide variety of workflow engines. So SnakeMake, Rihanna from the CERN demo, Argo, Jenkins, all those aren't going to be run on any one of those systems, but they need some place to run alongside them. And as well as like a whole suite of data management tools and a whole bunch of other custom things that are written. They all need a home to run. And that's where, adoption of containers and Kubernetes and all this stuff can really be beneficial. And I started to talk about this on the previous slide, but like, what does adoption of this stuff really enable? And it's really like everything from the institutional support side plus one. The whole idea of one API to rule them all, being able to package up your application, your script, your generated model, and just put it anywhere is extremely useful. Both from a institution support side, we don't have to set up anything custom for them to run their stuff, and from the researcher side, if they do happen to leave the institution or want to run it someplace else, they can pick it up and take them with them. It's no big deal. We also see with general like adoption of the containers and all that is much better workflow engine support. There's so like every day there's a new tool in this space, and it makes it's impossible to keep up with it all. And like lastly, the big thing it really enables is the whole idea of a fully reproducible research pipeline. It's much easier to just hand someone a container for them to run than it's like, okay, you need to install this version of this library and this version of this, compile it, and then pick it up, and hopefully it runs on platform. If not, you might have to, back rev your version of Linux, grab a different version of like glibc and do it all over again. Now, there are definitely some challenges with getting the outreach and adoption of these sort of tools and these methods. One thing I found, a lot of these are actually tend to be a little bit more on the research side specifically. The academic community in general tends to be very self-focused, and this is sort of like because of a variety of issues. And first and foremost, like papers tend to be the currency of academia, at least in research. It's something you can cite. It gets you respect from your peer group, greater chances of grant money. One thing we are starting to see a little bit of shift away from papers, and give me a paper, give me your code is now like give me a code branches, but give me a repo, give me your container, give me a way to reproduce this a lot easily. On the conference side, a lot of the academic conferences are catered to academics and other academics. Submissions generally require a paper. Workshops and tutorials are an avenue that don't necessarily require it, but still require a lot. Like my submission to Supercomputing 18 for a Kubernetes tutorial had an 8-page submission, which, you know, at least in the, like, if you're comparing it to KubeCon and any of the other, like, I won't say commercial conferences, but any of the other style conferences is crazy. Not all academic conferences do require that, but like the I2 TechX one is a good example that doesn't. The other thing is that there's a lot of like antiquated standards here. And that's mostly just history. Like higher ed honestly used to have a much bigger role in open source. Now things might start there, but they finish elsewhere, or there's much, or they're just not involved nearly as much as they used to be. This really started like back in the 2000s when hiring of devs and encouragement of institutional development was really curtailed, and they went to buy more things off the shelf. And this is definitely starting to turn around, but there's still a long way to go. And adoption of containers, Kubernetes, the surrounding tooling really offers us many advantages, as well as providing like an avenue for us to give back. And I really encourage, like, well, you're all here. You don't have to hear all this stuff, but it gives us a good way of bridging the gap and all that. Chris, do you have any, I'm done, by the way. Do you have any comments, Chris?
No, I think you covered it, Bob.
Cool. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I don't want to discourage people from asking them. This has been really good. I saw Bob give this talk at another community meeting for Kubernetes, and I really thought it was important because it laid out, you know, the 3 pillars and the way the different aspects of what's going on at EDU and IT, and I think it's a good level setting. So that everybody can kind of see it. I'm curious if this is similar to other people's experiences and at their universities, if they're have the same perspective. I think it's a pretty EDU wide perspective, and I'd love to get your feedback. Also, in the interest of time, if you want to ask those questions in the chat while Stephen maybe queues up his slides, we can get the WordPress talk in too. And Stephen, I'm just going to unmute you now. If you can self-unmute yourself. See if we can get Stephen talking here. Oh, I need to unmute Patrick. Okay, so Patrick has got the wondering. So Patrick, you should be unmuted now. Try talking.
Can you hear me?
I can absolutely hear you, yes.
All right, so we called in from a conference call because I have some other people on my team here in case there are questions that I can't answer.
Okie doke. If you want to share the screen or the slides, if you have them on this WordPress stuff. And I can go over long if we end up having a good discussion. That's not a worry, Bob. It was definitely worth it.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I'll go ahead and get started. So Diane's overselling that I'm doing best practices. It's kind of just what we did. So we have on our campus kind of an on-premise software as a service WordPress environment. We have 2 of them actually, one for kind of individuals and one for more departments. That's generally, and that's not run in OpenShift currently. That's just for other reasons, not really technical reasons. And we tend to push people towards those if they can, because there is a group that maintains and supports that for them. There are cases where someone already has an existing WordPress site and doesn't want to manage necessarily the server anymore, but they don't want to use the SaaS offering because they have plugins that they want to use that the support team doesn't want to support, things like that. So then they might stand up WordPress on our OpenShift environment. And so we've been allowing people to do this. So we've been on OpenShift since version 2. And in the version 2 days, they had quick starts. So we had WordPress quick starts so that people would quickly stand up WordPress. They didn't have to worry about, understanding they need to set the database, they need to set up all this and that. So we made it fairly simple for them. And when we migrated to OpenShift version 3, we just simulated what we had with the quick starts and the templates to make it easier for people to start WordPress environments. We also have people that do the same for Drupal. Today we'll talk about WordPress, but everything that we say basically is the same for Drupal, except that you're using the Drupal code and the Drupal tools. So today we'll talk about WordPress. On my screen I have our Git repository for what we use for building our templates and images. Basically what we have is we have a Docker file that we use to build a WordPress image and store it in the OpenShift registry. I'm not going to go through everything in here, but basically it's basing it off of the Red Hat PHP image, so that it's no different than if they installed it using PHP. And then it's going through and doing a couple things, setting up some custom things with the Apache. Like, for example, we have some reverse proxies. It's identifying those kinds of things. And installing the WP CLI tools. If it was Drupal, it'd be installing Drush. And then has a bunch of scripts that a former colleague of ours put together to make getting all this set up pretty easy. So now I'm going to go back and then look at just one of the scripts. And this is the main one that does the heavy lifting. So it sets up a bunch of environment variables, which it then uses the env subs command to change the various configuration files. Sets up a few other things for Apache. Again, we're just doing this since when the container starts up, the customer can't change these, and we're setting up so that it's going to be somewhat performant for them. And a few other things. And one of the big things it does near the very end here is, depending on the type of install they did, particularly for multi-site, it uses the WP CLI to download and install WordPress for them. And that happens on the initial install. There's some code earlier on that says, oh, if it already recognizes as a WordPress installed, it's not going to try and install it again. So again, we have a Jenkins job that builds these images and pushes them to the internal OpenShift registry. And then the fun part happens, I'm going to switch over here because it's a little easier to read, is our OpenShift template. So I'm not going to go through again the entire template, but basically it sets up the PHP and it sets up the database server, the passwords and all that stuff. And then at the very end, we have I'll get there someday, we have a bunch of questions we ask them so that they can customize the environment to a certain extent when it gets set up for them. And so OpenShift templates have the support for asking these questions when you create a WordPress image. So now if we go over to our web console, so in our OpenShift web console, all of our custom templates, we have this UNC tab where all those show up. And one thing I forgot to mention, we do have two types of WordPress installs. We have what we call the standalone, which is PVC based. So if someone wants basically, like they don't want to manage the WordPress code, they do this, and then the WordPress gets installed in a persistent volume, then they can go into the admin interface and click the buttons to say, okay, update my plugins, update the version of WordPress, all that stuff, so that they can do it as simple as possible. But other people that want to actually manage some aspects of WordPress, maybe they're writing their own plugins, maybe they want to manage the plugins separately for whatever reason, we have that where it sets up so that it'll do a basic install for them, but then the code is managed through Git rather than just installed on the PVC. So we do the same thing for Drupal. We provide our customers with the two options depending on their needs. So if they just need a simple WordPress and want to manage very little of it and push buttons to update it, they'll use the standalone, which we call the PVC one. Or if they want to do more managing, they'll use the Git-based one. But if we just quickly walk through, just wanted to show all those questions at the end. here's where they can answer all those questions. And then we provide in some default values and some things like username and passwords, they don't need to fill in. We're using the little simple regex that is provided in templating to automatically generate those. And if you were to create one, it would show you those when the page closed. And additionally, we have in this Git repository, we have a description, a README with the description of what all the fields do in the template. But we also have custom customer-facing documentation on our knowledge base site that kind of walks them through some of the basics of this. Our customers do reach out to us sometimes if they run into trouble, and we have to help them out with those that may not be covered in our customer documentation. We try to use those as opportunities to update the documentation. Another thing that we do offer that's kind of new-ish is we do have shibboleth proxies and a WordPress shibboleth plugin that a former employee of ours wrote a plugin for WordPress so that you can integrate shibboleth into WordPress. It works well enough for what our customers need. We can provide more information later on. That would take a little more time to go into if others are interested. One of the challenges which we mentioned on a previous call for us is getting customers to maintain and update WordPress. Again, with the quick start, the standalone quick starts, they can easily get a notification when they log in and says, "Oh, there's a new version of WordPress, there's a new version of these plugins. Click this button and update it." The people that are using the Git-based one is a little more difficult because they need to actually go and commit the updates themselves. There's been a challenge for making sure people are updating it. When they sign up for our OpenShift service, they do have to agree to a terms of service saying that they will maintain, regardless of whether it's WordPress or not, they will update their code. They will maintain that if a security vulnerability in whatever programming language and whatever frameworks that they're using in their programming languages comes out, they're responsible for updating it. We are trying to figure out how we would put together some ways to notify those who are horribly out of date, and we're still investigating some of that. One of the things that we've put together is we gather some kind of KPI data, and we're pumping it into log files and having Splunk consume it, and we have these kinds of dashboards that show this information. So, for example, over on the right-hand side, we see the templates that we've created, and some of them are the ones that Red Hat provides with OpenShift. And we see the numbers of the ones, but we don't have the versions right now. So one of the additional things that we're doing is, let me go over to my command line window, is we're putting together some tools that'll connect to the pods and find out what the versions are based on the appropriate files in either Drupal or WordPress and what that data is, and then we'll pipe that into another log file or the same log file, and then consume that data in Splunk so we can do reporting on it. And then we'll have information for us, for our information security office, and then if we decide to contact customers saying you're grossly out of date, you're supposed to be updating this because you agreed to do that with your terms of service, then we'll do that. And this is a very crude version, but all it's doing is connecting to a pod and running exec and then grepping in the appropriate file to pull the data. And we'll make that prettier once we start putting in the file, but that was just a quick example I wanted to show of what we're doing. And so I ran through that a lot faster than I thought I would. So I'm kind of at the end of what I want to talk about. What about it?
Basically.
Yeah, and so again, all of this stuff was specific to WordPress, but the same applies for our Drupal templates as well.
There's a question.
We have a question. The question was from Chris at Michigan. So, do you offer customers direct access to their file systems outside of the CMS UI?
So they have access through the OCRSH command or through the terminal tab in the OpenShift web console, and they have access, if it's stored in a persistent volume, they have access to it that way. But that's the limit they have. In our other SaaS-based WordPress environments, they do not get any access except web access through the WordPress environment. the WordPress web interface.
Let's see if there's any other questions here. There was one that was asked in the chat and answered in the chat about from Wade.
Oh yeah, so yeah, in the OpenShift environments, we don't really have people set up with Varnish and Redis. We do have one particular site that we discovered that was set up with that to make it performant, but it was something that was done outside of the norm and not anything that we have templates or automated ways. It'd be up to the customer to set that up themselves. We do have that in some of our non-OpenShift WordPress environments for the high traffic sites. And again, we know at least one customer on our OpenShift platform that is using Varnish and Redis.
And there's one last.
Yeah, that's interesting, Chris. I'd like to talk to you about that. Again, a former colleague of ours set most of this up to when we were doing our conversion from 2 to 3, and we're happy to hear other ideas about how to make improvements of it. Again, some of the updating of WordPress has been recently just because we've been looking more into some of the statistics and looking into options for container security scanning and stuff. How do we identify anybody that's not actually updating? What do we do about it? So that's kind of where we are. We're still in an investigative process of improving some of this because this has been set up for well over a year now and hasn't really changed much since we originally set it up. Do you have any comments, William?
I mean, part of the struggle there is that as far as our customers go, the WordPress sites that they end up setting up are all going to be vastly different. So some people end up wanting to actually customize the code behind it itself, right? And so we can't kind of blanket override that because then we'd be basically effectively overriding any changes they made. Now that's supposed to be kind of the priority behind the Git-based ones so that they can actually use Git to manage their code. Unfortunately, customers use what you give them, and they don't necessarily all do that. And so that's kind of the trick as far as updating. And also, if we were to, force upgrade of WordPress, and plugins then go out of date or plugins stop working, et cetera, there's kind of a struggle there with the customers. And so we actually have a kind of a policy as far as using our platform that the customer is technically responsible for patching their own applications. And we do want to be involved as far as alerting them to this, but at the end of the day, it is their responsibility, it is their application.
And one other thing is that another thing we've been dealing with is not just with WordPress, but what versions of PHP are they using? For example, PHP 5.6 and 7.0 go end of life at the end of the calendar year, and how do we get people to migrate? Okay, WordPress will migrate fine, but maybe the plugin that they heavily depend on is I don't know, it's still using something from 5.6 or something like that. And those have been challenges as well, about how do we identify those, get those customers to migrate and such. So I don't have answers for them, but those are the kind of the challenges that we're facing, especially with the large number of people that took advantage of our templating and quick starts.
Hey guys, this is Chris again. One question that it was too long to type into chat. So first of all, thank you for this overview. It's great. It's right where we are. You're ahead of us, so it's really timely. For your Git-based customers, are they forking your repo and making changes to it? How is their code integrated into the site, or is that something that you're doing via the template?
I think we do the initial install for them, and then they're responsible from that as their base for the Git.
So the template sets up things like because they're also using databases on the platform too, right? So the template goes ahead and sets up like WP config and whatnot to actually connect to databases the way that OpenShift expects them to. That way the customer doesn't have to have the knowledge there in order to do that. And then from that point on, they're effectively managing the repo.
So the GitLab repo that you showed kind of provides the base image, but then their repo is the one that's providing the code into the file system. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And one thing I forgot to mention, I've already done this for a few other people. If you, our Git repository is restricted to our campus network, but if anybody wants copies of our OpenShift templates, I'm happy to provide them to you. And I mean, obviously, you can, you don't have to use them, but you're welcome to see what we did and ask questions about why we did it.
Actually, hadn't seen that, but it looks very similar.
Yeah, we haven't seen that one, Wade, but we might take a look at that. Thank you.
And you might fork it and update it, because I'm sure if it was an OpenShift evangelist thing, it was perhaps just what we use in demo when we're doing our live demo, so it might not be.
So
I
was going to type some of this, but we'll just come off mute for a second. I played around with it a little bit. It does have a Git option as well, but they take a bit of a perhaps different approach from the limited exposure I've had to the stuff. They don't fork, but they don't include all of the WordPress software. They just include a directory for templates, for themes, plugins, that type of thing, and merge it in during the build. So it's still a standalone copy of WordPress, but they've merged in the things that people maybe should want to be able to have control over. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it looks very familiar to what you just demonstrated. Yeah.
One
I'd
thought,
also like a copy of the repo.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying I'll chime in for a copy of the repo as well, please.
So one thought here in Michigan that we're developing is the idea of maybe an 80% use case and then a 20% use case where for those people that don't have, particularly on the Drupal side, if they don't have any custom modules or themes, we provide a base for them where the themes and modules are stored in a persistent volume. We would update Drupal core via the base layer, and then have all the pods inherit that base layer, and then use Drush to update the modules. And then for those people that are doing completely custom stuff, have a different model, but I don't think we have reached a real good agreement as to what that model is. And maybe it's what you guys are talking about, where if you're on the 20%, you have the technical capability to assume responsibility for all your updates yourself. So what do you guys think about that?
I think for us mostly, if people are doing custom stuff, they'll just update it to their Git repository from the start. And if people aren't using anything special plugins, then they use our kind of SaaS offering is what we direct them to, because there's a support team behind that who provide support on the plugins and stuff. We're actually being kicked out of our conference room, so we have to take off. Sorry.
All right, that's all right. Well, thank you very much. The next meeting
by the HR lady, so we can't say no.
The next meeting will be on September 14th, and I'll be traveling, so I'm going to make Stephen meeting up and take the notes next time around. If you have a topic that you'd like to hear about or you want to speak about, reach out to either me or Stephen, and we'll set you up on the agenda. So thanks again to everybody who presented and all of your great questions. So take care, all.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
And if you haven't yet, take a look at the HackMD file, and I'll put that on the mailing list. And if I got your names wrong, change them.
Diane, when I attempted to authenticate to the HackMD, I got a screen that said choose method, and then there was no method to choose.
Go into here and see what that is all about. There's 5 of you online, Bob. And which of you was speaking? Sorry, I wasn't.
I'm sorry, this is Chris Cutler.
Chris Cutler, okay. So when you join,
then I go I go into edit mode, and then I can say, so when I just go into hackmd.io, it says,
Yeah.
do you want to log in? And I say, hey, I want to log in. That's where I thought you and Bob were talking about authenticating via GitHub. And then it
Yeah.
says choose method.
And it didn't give you a list of methods?
It's a blank little box.
That's it. Well, let me see if I'll send a note out on the mailing list, but I think you might just have to refresh and maybe a better link for HackMD. So let me just.
You know what it is, Diane? I'm sorry, that was there's an ad block thing. When I disable my ad block, then the options come up.
Okay, good to know. I'm visualizing here the interface without being able to see it without having login. But yeah, this is pretty much publish this now. And yeah, if there's something else anyone wants to talk about, please do. That would be great. And I loved hearing about the grade craft stuff in the application. So that was really cool to learn about. We often hear the underpinnings. We always hear about the underpinnings. We don't hear about the services you're running on top of it. So it's been very interesting for me too. All right, guys, I'm going to kill the session, stop sharing, and send out the notes. Take care, all.